Hello everyone and welcome to the third round of action at the Tata Steel Chess Tournament in Wijk aan Zee, the Netherlands. In this round we had some very interesting matchups, not so much the elite meeting the prodigies, but the elite meeting the elite, and the prodigies meeting the prodigies. For example, in this game we had Magnus Carlsen against Liren, but we also had Gukesh against Nodirbek. So again, some of the older players meeting the older players and the younger players meeting the younger players. We also had Praggnanandhaa against Keymer. But let's have a look at this game. Magnus Carlsen, he's the World Chess Champion, but he is going to be losing his World Chess Championship title to either Ding Liren or Jan Nepomniachtchi. Ding is going to play that match hopefully in a couple months. So I was very curious to see what Magnus was going to try with the white pieces, right? He's going to force Ding to show his hand. Like, what is he going to play against Nepo? So Magnus opened the game with d4, knight f6 by Ding, knight f3, and d5. We saw in the second round how Ding Liren played the Queen's Indian defense with b6 here. So with the move d5, he already deprives himself of that option. And I was very curious to see what he was going to do after the move c4. e6, and maybe what he was going to do against the Catalan or the Queen's Gambit. But Magnus goes for the London opening. c5 by Ding, e3, and here the move e6. e6 is very solid. Another option is the move knight c6. This is a little bit more combative, but black must be ready for the lines with knight bd2 and queen b6. Like, this is quite critical. Black is taking a pawn, but white can take, and white's pawn structure is ruined here, but he has a slight lead in development here. Anyway, this gets very sharp, but the move e6 again is extremely solid. So Magnus goes c3, now bishop d6 by Ding, offering the bishop exchange, and Magnus gives this tricky little check, and black only has one good way to block. You don't quite want to play pawn cloud, and you cannot quite block with the bishop because white will take here, and white will win a pawn. And for the same reason, you cannot block with the knight here because you lose a piece. So knight c6 is the only move. But now Magnus goes for an interesting approach. He trades on c6, he trades on d6, and plays the move queen a4. So he wants to start playing against these weak pawns on the queen side. Now Ding castles, Magnus castles as well. But here Ding solves the problem by taking on d4 and playing c5. Perhaps what Magnus could have tried was the move queen a3. But I think all of this is some sort of theory, like after 94, I believe white does something like this, and e5. Like, it all gets very sharp, but black is fine here according to theory. And Ding knows everything. That's just a rule in chess. Ding knows everything. So he cannot out-prepare the Ding. So Magnus just played castles, but now Ding takes and plays c5 and solves the problem of this pawn. If he is one move too slow, let's say he plays bishop d7 after rook c1, the pawn on c6 will always be weakness, and white is a very pleasant advantage. Knight can always go here, here, and here, and c5 can always be met by queen a3. But again, c5 solves the problems. Rook c1 by Magnus, and here's c4. So Ding is keeping the position close, but with the move c4, the pawn on b2 becomes a little bit backwards. So Magnus tries to solve that right away with the move b3, bishop d7 by Ding, queen f5, and Ding takes on b3 and goes rook fb8, and it looks very symmetrical. Like, maybe if Magnus can get his pieces developed, he can argue that the bishop is a little bit passive and he might have a slight advantage, but it's very difficult because Ding's rooks are so active on the queen side. Rook b5, queen c7, knight e8, a very elegant move to solve the problems, because after this trade, the knight lands on a very nice d6 square. Knight e5, maybe what Magnus could have tried is, let's say, rook here, hit the bishop, but Ding just goes here, defend this, and black is completely fine. So knight e5, bishop e8, knight d3, trying to maneuver his knight to the strong c5 square, a5, f3, and rook b7, rook a2. Ding puts his rook here, so Ding's idea is just to defend this pawn with all he has, and maybe at a good moment go a4 and trade it off for white's b pawn, making the board only smaller and smaller. King f2 by Magnus, a4, rook ca1 and knight c8, and maybe if Magnus wants to keep the game going, the only move to do so would be the move b4, but I feel like this is actually quite risky because black firmly controls the b5 square and his a-pawn is actually quite strong. So Magnus goes h4, king f8, g4, but here it's clear where the game is headed. We see mass exchanges. Again, maybe Magnus's knights are slightly better, but it's not enough to win the game, even for Magnus Carlsen. So Ding, extremely solid, nothing to do, and this game ends in a draw. So pretty good result for Ding. He's showing that, again, his preparation is great, and it's very difficult to beat him in the opening. So Jan's got his work cut out for him for the World Chess Championship match. Alright, now let's have a look at another game. We had the game between Fabiano Caruana and my good friend Jorden van Foreest. Yes, that's how you actually pronounce it. It's not Jorden van Foreest. It's Jorden van Foreest. And Fabiano opens the game up with his bread and butter, the move e4. e5 by Jorden, knight f3, and now knight f6, the pattern of defense by Jorden. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen Jorden play this in a classical game of chess. And honestly, it's a little bit surprising because Fabiano has just made a course on the pattern of defense, so you can be sure that he's put a lot of work into this opening. And, you know, maybe Jorden wanted to have a little poke at him or something, I don't know. But Fabiano takes an e5, d6, knight f3, Jorden takes an e4. By the way, it's important to know that black should not take here because of queen e2, and if the knight moves, there's knight c6 check, and white wins the queen. So a little trick to remember, but d6 was played, this is the main line, knight f3, takes d4, and we get a very symmetrical structure, but white generally hopes for an advantage because he is a tempo up. But bishop d3, but here Jorden plays a move that I personally have never seen before. Black always plays the moves bishop d6 here, or knight c6, or bishop b7, or bishop f5, or bishop f5. All very solid. But Jorden grabbed the bishop and put it on e6. Okay, Fabiano castled, and now the move f5. So he's bolstering his knight on e4, but he's really weakening the square on e5. So let's see what Fabiano is going to do. So Fabiano goes queen e2, bishop e7, and puts his knight there right away. Knight d7 by Jorden. Jordan's still playing very quickly, as you guys can see here, so he must still be in his preparation. And Fabiano decides to trade and play f3. Jorden just castles, because taking the knight is probably quite risky. Black is going to take with the f-pawn. The bishop doesn't have a good square. If you go here, well, white is out a piece, but you don't quite want to enter this unprepared. You know, Jorden might do something like takes, maybe bishop h4, followed by rook f8, and it looks pretty scary, especially when you know you're going to be playing against someone's preparation. So it's basically someone's computer. So Fabiano played the move bishop to f4, developing his bishop, and now Jorden finally, he goes bishop f6, hitting the pawn, c3, and he goes g5. So the question really is like, okay, eventually white is threatening to take the knight, right? So when is he going to move it back? Of course, this is a little bit passive, but he goes g5, hitting the bishop, bishop e5, and now knight d6 by Jorden. Okay, f4 by Fabiano, strengthening the position, putting some pressure here, and Jorden goes g4. However, now it feels like black has some targets in his position, especially the pawn on f5. And Fabiano here comes up with a very nice maneuver. He goes for the move knight a3, rook a8, and knight c2. So he wants to bring his knight e3 and pressure that pawn on f5. Bishop d8, rook a d1, c6, and knight e3. Again, this is always weak. Maybe black has to go knight e4 at some point, but then white can try to nibble away at the pawn on d5. So b5 was played, perhaps to stop the move c4. So Fabiano goes a4, opening up a second front on the queen side. Takes queen c2. How is black going to defend this pawn? h5 was played, king h1, a3, Fabiano takes, knight c4, we see a trade, and Fabiano moves his king back. Perhaps, you know, he was worried about, let's say, bishop coming to d5, followed by h4, h3. And in this position, Jorden makes quite an elementary mistake. I don't know what happened, maybe a loss of concentration, but I would normally never expect a player of his caliber to make such a mistake. But he plays the move h4. Now it's a good time to pause your video and try to figure out what white can do here. White has the move knight takes g4. And the problem is, if you take, there's queen g6 check, which is basically mate. Because the only way to block is this. You kind of go here, my bishop controls that square, and then it's mate. So Jorden loses a pawn, and it's quite an important pawn. It's right in front of his king, so now his king is also wide open. He goes bishop d5, knight e3, and bishop e4, activating the bishop. And Fabiano comes up here with a great decision. It's very easy to just, you know, try to improve your position, but black does get some compensation with the bishop going to d3. But Fabiano absolutely makes the right call here. He goes queen e2, bishop d3, and sags the exchange. He realizes, like, okay, I'm going to exchange down here. But first of all, white has two pawns. Black's king is open. Black's pieces are kind of active. White has a great bishop on e5. He can always create a passer here and potentially try to rip open black's king side with moves like rook f3, maybe g3, try to get that pawn out of the way. And it's really tough for Jorden. So he goes rook e6, rook b1, and rook g6. And now Fabiano enters with the rook. The problem is, if you ever move the bishop, white can trade, and the pawn on f5 starts hanging. So queen f7, Jorden is hanging on with all his might, but now Fabiano goes c4, and it just becomes too much for black to hold. Jorden goes c5, but Fabiano just takes, bishop b7, rook b7, pinning the bishop, queen e6, rook c7, an excellent move defending this pawn, and now he's ready to jump in with his knight. So Jorden goes rook c8, But now Fabiano just trades, centralizes the queen, goes bishop d6, offering the bishop trade. Again, this pawn on the 5 is going to hang. Black's king is very weak, so it's looking very tough for Jorden. Fabiano trades, takes on a 5. And since this bishop is under attack and it is pinned to the king, Jorden is forced to trade. But now look at these pawns. White is a very strong D pawn, a very strong C pawn potentially. You cannot go rook f6 here, hitting the knight, because white goes d7. And you don't have rook d6 available, you don't have king e7 available. So white gets another queen. So Jorden gave a check. Rook c2, trying to stop the pawn, but now king e3. Another excellent move by Fabiano. If you take, there's d7 again. You don't have rook c8, you don't have rook d4. After this, there's this. And white gets a new queen, so it's game over. So Jorden brought the king, but Fabiano does the same. And after c5, Jorden resigned. There's nothing black can do about white pushing his pawns up with king d5, c6 after check. There's always knight d4. And so it's just completely lost. So a very unfortunate loss for my good friend Jorden van Foreest, but a very nice win for Fabiano Caruana, who now joins the leaders on 2 points out of 3 games. Also on 2 points is Magnus, Carlsen, Anish, Giri, Liren, and Nodirbek Abdusattorov. On 50%, we have Levon, Aronian, Parham, Maghsoodloo, Erigaisi, Praggnanandhaa, Wesley, and then on 1 point we have Keymer, Jorden, van Foreest, Rapport, and Gukesh. Finally got his first half a point of the tournament. He's on half a point. He's on half a point out of 3 games. But at any rate, I do hope that all of you guys enjoyed this recap. I will make sure to bring you guys these at every single round. Make sure to subscribe. Would really appreciate it. You know, leave a like, leave a comment. And I look forward to seeing y'all in the next video.